Welcome to our lecture series on fundamentals of game design and gameplay. We're discussing incorporating stories and narratives into games. Watch our previous 5 videos on this topic. Now we are discussing linear stories. In linear story, the player does not have the agency to change the game plot or game story. The player always feels or faces the same story, so we are discussing the advantages. And linear stories are also capable of greater emotional power. I think as the designer or writer is in control and there is only one ending, so the designer or writer can create some emotionally rich ending of the game, and it requires less content. The story is linear. Watch our previous video, you will understand. I explained those there. And in terms of non-linear stories, here the stories can change. Each time the player will play the game, he may enjoy a different story of the game. His actions change the sequence of the story. It can go to one of the many stories and one of the many endings. The non-linear stories can be of different types: just branching stories, fallback stories, and emergent narrative stories. Now, what is branching stories? I think in this case, in non-linear story, as we know, that based on the player's actions, the story will change. I think the story is kept as part of different plots, but based on the user's actions from a certain plot, the game can go to multiple plots based on the user actions. So in different plot events, the story will branch into different plots. That's how the story will change, and it can lead to multiple different endings. So we can say that players will have a different experience each time he plays the game. It will offer many plots, many game plots that will split from each other at different points. Responsibility of designers, the responsibility in non-linear stories, they should decide what are the plots and how those plots should link to each other, and where they split and how they split and why they split and at what event they will split. And also they should be responsible so that still using those branching and the story is still meaningful and ends into a meaningful ending. In this case, the storytelling engine will keep track what is the current plot. Core mechanics will send triggers to inform the next possible plot. In non-linear story, how the game story will branch from a particular plot, I think you can take 3 different ways to it. I think immediate, it can be some actions, some irrevocable actions that will cause the story to branch. I think you have taken an action and the story will move to a particular direction. You cannot change back the story. And deferred, I think what happens is at a particular plot, which way the story will move, it may be dependent on the decision that was made in some earlier plot or some earlier game event. And in cumulative influence, maybe from a particular plot, which way the story will move, it can be a decision based on all or many different decisions that the player has made at different plots or different game events. So I think it is the designer's responsibility to define how the stories will move and from which point or at what plot it will, what type of branching mechanism, it's immediate or deferred or cumulative, something like that. So you can see this branching from this point the story can move to this, or from this point it can move to 3 different plots. So there can be one ending here at C, or there can be another ending at I. Now, disadvantage of branching. If you try to implement your game as a non-linear story or as a branching, I think it can be extremely expensive to implement. I think how those plots will be, how they will interlink, and how you will link them, and I think there are lots of work to do in terms of designing and also in terms of implementation. And player must play the game repeatedly so to see all the content. For some players it may be something good, they may like it, but for many it will not. Another thing, in case of branching, every critical event has to branch to its own unique section of the tree. I think we have to uh, plan the plot well so that the story don't become irrelevant. Let's see, at a particular plot, if one of the character dies, so from that point whatever plot will come next, it should always show that character to be dead. But if the branching is arbitrary and if you don't plan it well, it can happen that a plot is coming, though still the player died in any earlier plot, but the player is seen alive in this particular plot. So you have to keep in track. I think the death can be a critical event in those plots, so it has to branch or forward to its unique branching where the player will be always dead, just as an example. And in nonlinear stories, resource requirements for the games expand very rapidly. And in fallback stories, it lies in between linear stories and branching stories. You can see this here. I think you will allow the plots to branch to each other, to connect to each other arbitrarily or freely. Not freely, I think they also has to make some sort of sense, but ultimately those branching will fall into one single event or one single game plot for a set of plots, and it's inevitable, and you cannot change the story back to any of the plots behind plots. It has to move forward, and then it can come to another inevitable event after branching through many plots. I think among all of this, I think in terms of branching on non-linear stories, I think fallback stories, it is the industry standard. I think game designers use this strategy in many of the successful games. I think many action adventure games and many role-playing games, they use this fallback stories to incorporate non-linear stories. And what about emergent narrative? It's sort of a research problem. Here the designers do not include a story. The story comes from the game. I think the core mechanics, it dynamically evolves the story or generates the story. It's kind of still impossible type of thing, but it's telling based on the player's actions. The game engine or storytelling engine or core mechanic, they should be intelligent enough that they will be able to create those stories on their own, and each time the player will play, maybe they may be able to experience a different type of stories. So one of the artificial intelligence research field is automated storytelling that deals with this type of scenarios. Now, before going to the next lecture, it's justetc.net, jobs.justetc.net, recruitment, mall.justetc.org, shopping mall, computer.justetc.net, short notes and training videos on IT and software development, university.justetc.org, online and offline training, justetchosting.com, hosting services.